Well, I'm going to go ahead and just get us started so we can make sure we get everyone to that Phillies game tonight. So, as I think everyone here knows, so I'm Angelica. I'm the director at the Montclair History Center. We're so happy tonight to have Dr. Jen Janofsky with us. So she's going to discuss the discovery of the mass Hessian grave that was located at Red Bank Battlefield. So this happened in 2022. And this discovery is essentially 245 years since these individuals were essentially entombed at Fort Mercer. And sadly lost their lives at the Battle of Red Bank along the Delaware River. I know that Jen has some really fascinating updates and information and has talked about this topic throughout the state before and also with us. So I'm really thrilled to welcome her this evening. And for those who don't know, Jennifer is a Rowan University professor and curator at the Battlefield Park and president of the Glen Ridge Historical Society. So thank you so much, Jennifer. And my only housekeeping rule is feel free, of course, to use the chat. And if anyone has questions, we'll make sure we leave time for that at the end. Or if there's something I can answer, I will certainly chime in. And thank you for joining. So I'm going to pass it off.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us this evening. Thank you, Angelica. I always love giving presentations to the Montclair History Center. I did this a little while ago, and if you're curious, you can watch a video on the research we've been doing on Black participation at the Battle of Red Bank. And so when I started at Red Bank, I think it was in around 2013, I should say, like, as a historian, my practice as a historian is to teach inclusive histories, to bring everybody to the table, all the voices, just like the Montclair History Center has done so beautifully, and to tell all the stories of the participants at that site and at my site. And so for many years, I was really focused on talking about the Black experience fighting at the Battle of Red Bank. And so when we had this discovery of a mass Hessian burial in 2022, it provided an even new and more interesting opportunity to talk about the diversity of participants in the American Revolution. And so I'm going to share my screen. I can talk to you all about the Battle of Red Bank, the discovery of the Hessian remains, and then what we're doing today. So I can give you a really fun update on where the project is. And of course, at the end, I am always more than happy to answer questions. And so please feel free to ask away as we get to the end. And so just going to share the screen here. Okay, and so a quick word before we get started. So obviously I'm Jen Janofsky. My partner in crime, if you will, in this archaeology project is Wade Katz. He's our archaeologist. He is the archaeologist on the project, and I am the public historian on the project. So I am the one who interacts with our park visitors, who does a lot of speaking engagements, who crafts the narrative around the discovery. So Wade gives me the archaeological evidence, and then I work with Wade to tell the story of the discovery. Just as a heads up, as we go through the presentation, there are images of human remains that I'm going to be sharing with you. I think sometimes the display of human remains can be somewhat controversial. It's important for our project because not only are these individuals who we care very deeply about, but their bodies actually are providing us with an interesting artifact of battle, and we're using that evidence to get a better understanding of the brutality of the Battle of Red Bank. So we just ask as I go through, please don't take any pictures of the remains or post on social media. As I'm sure you can understand, we spent all summer working on this project and spent a lot of time with these individuals. And so, as I just said, we are fiercely protective of them and don't want anything to be misconstrued in any sort of like social media post. Not that you would, but just always the disclaimer that we give when we give these discussions. Also, to start the conversation, it's always important to note the history of land use at Red Bank Battlefield Park. And so what you see on your screen here are maps that document the habitation of our site by indigenous peoples for thousands and thousands and thousands of years before any colonial settlements were established there. And so, for example, you're seeing a piece of Native American pottery. This particular piece is over 1,000 years old. Projectile points, things of that nature. We find just as much military material at Red Bank as we do Native American material. And so just to talk a little bit about who we are and what we do. So as Angelica mentioned, I am a professor of history at Rowan University. I teach early American history, I teach public history and American material culture. And I'm also the park director at Red Bank Battlefield Park. So I essentially wear two hats. And so when I'm not in the classroom with my students, I'm at the park working with park visitors to understand Red Bank's history, and then vice versa. And so we're a 44-acre park. We are located in Gloucester County, New Jersey. The next slide is actually a map to give you a sense of physically where we are. We are not the Red Bank of Monmouth County. So I know that might be like where your brain is going, but you have to keep going south. You know, on the turnpike, you're getting off at like exit 4. You're almost to Philadelphia. We are a part of Gloucester County's Department of Parks and Recreation. And we are located directly across from Philadelphia International Airport and Fort Mifflin, which is our sister fort across the Delaware River. So if you're standing in Red Bank Battlefield Park, you can see Philadelphia International Airport. People love to come to the park to see the airplanes taking off, which I'm sure, as you can imagine, makes it difficult to offer a public program because it's so loud. But you can also enjoy views of the Philadelphia skyline. And so each year we have about 200,000 people who visit our park. And this will give you a sense physically of where we are. These are historic maps of the Delaware River from the 18th century. The river has changed dramatically over time. And so where the red circle is, this is where Fort Mercer was located. And then this is where we are today. And so you can see the proximity to Philadelphia. Essentially, South Jersey is a suburb of Philadelphia. And so we have a lot of sort of cross visitation from both the city of Philadelphia and suburbs and South Jersey. In terms of the park and how it's used, first and foremost, we are a recreational park. We have walking trails, we have views of the river, and so every day we have our routine group of walkers who enjoy the park. They let me know if anything is amiss, if anything needs my attention. They know they can call on Dr. Jen and she will make sure that it gets done. And they are fiercely protective of the park. They're very proud of the history that took place there, and are always eager to talk to people about the history that happened there. So we have recreational trails. We have the remains of Fort Mercer. We have a couple of monuments that you can see. This one in particular is from 1906. These are cannons that were actually found in the park through an archaeology project in the 1930s, which is pretty interesting. And then this historic home here is the 1748 James and Anne Whitall House. This was a Quaker farmstead, over 400 acres, and we'll talk about how the American military seized their property to construct Fort Mercer in 1777. So, you know, some people have a lot of familiarity with the Philadelphia campaign and the American Revolution, and other folks don't have a lot of information at all. So if you have that information, just sit tight. You know, maybe this is a good refresher, but for everybody else, I think it's always important to sort of orient where we are in the Revolution in terms of the Fort Mercer and the Battle of Red Bank. And so it's the fall of 1777, and the Delaware River is a pivotal highway, if you will, to getting supplies in and out of the city of Philadelphia. Here's where we are, where it says Fort Red Bank, and this is Fort Red Bank, Fort Mercer. They both names apply. In late September of 1777, Philadelphia falls to the British. And according to the general sentiment of war and the rules of war in the 18th century, when the rebel capital falls, the war is over. But that's not the case here with the American Revolution. It kind of stumped the British. They said, well, we seized the city, now it's supposed to be done. And the revolutionaries just said, no, we're just getting started. So the British hunker down in Philadelphia in September. And first and foremost, they need to get supplies into the city. They had sort of taken a backdoor into the city. They did not come up through the Delaware River. They came in through what's today the Philadelphia suburbs. And so what they need to do is get supplies the fastest way, the most efficient way is to bring it up the Delaware River. But a couple of things are going on in the river. Number one, a series of fortifications to prevent the British from accessing the city. So you have Red Bank here, Fort Mercer. Across from here is Mud Island. Mud Island is Fort Mifflin. To the south, not seen on this map, is Fort Billingsport. So you have three pretty substantial forts protecting the river. You can see these are British boats here. They can't make their way physically up the river because of these fortifications. These little X's that you see in the water are called chevaux de frise. And that's just a fancy French word for sharpened spears that were submerged under the river that would pierce the hulls of these ships that were trying to access the river. Caught up in the middle of this is the Whitehall family. So the Whitehall family builds their plantation home in 1748. They're Quakers, they're pacifists. They are a very affluent farming family in South Jersey. James Whitehall is the largest producer of brick and lumber in Gloucester County. He has a shad fishery. They have fruit orchards. This was a very affluent family. The American military, the American Army approached them in 1777, early 1777, and said, we would like to seize your property to build a fort here. And the Whitehalls said, no, thank you. We're Quakers. We do not want a fort on our property. The Americans rolled in the spring of 1777, seized the property, and constructed Fort Mercer out of material that they took from the Whitehall family. So all those beautiful fruit orchards that took generations to mature, those were cut down and became the material to create Fort Mercer. Fort Mercer is named after Henry Mercer, the fallen hero of Princeton, a dear friend of George Washington. And by October of 1777, there is a ginormous fort located within like 100 yards of the Whitehall house. So who is in the fort? Who is protecting the garrison? And coming in mid-October to defend the fort is this guy, Colonel Christopher Green, who is the commander of the 1st and 2nd Rhode Island regiments. And so Christopher Green, I always tell my students, don't have history crushes because they will only break your heart. You'll find out something very disappointing about them. But so far, Christopher Green, probably because he died young, has not disappointed. He's a remarkable individual. And what makes him remarkable is that in the garrison, the Rhode Island Regiment is a fully integrated fighting force. And so you had roughly 10% of the 500 men there were Black. They were Native American, they were African American, they were formerly enslaved individuals. And so this is the last time in the American Revolution that there is going to be an integrated force. After this battle, everybody goes to Valley Forge, and in 1778 there's a Black regiment that's created. And so when that happens, it is a segregated unit. So at this moment in time in October, everybody is fighting together. So there's an overall strength of about 500 Rhode Island regimenters, and then some random other folks, militia folks, who hop in sort of at the last minute. General George Washington, writes to Christopher Green, the post with which you are entrusted is of the utmost importance to America. The whole defense of the Delaware absolutely depends on it. So I always try to imagine Christopher Green reading that letter from George Washington and having a moment, taking a deep breath, because all eyes are on him. So in terms of who is attacking the fort, we're talking about Hessian soldiers. And so Hessian soldiers throughout history sort of have gotten a bad rap, a bad reputation. Like we call them the mercenaries, right? These are the pillagers of villages. They burn and they steal and commit all sorts of horrible crimes. What we're trying to do at Red Bank is complicate that narrative a little bit. The Hessian forces were the premier fighting forces of the 18th century. If there is a war taking place in the world in the 1700s, Hessian soldiers are there. They're hired as auxiliaries because many of these countries don't have enough men to support a fighting force. And so having auxiliaries come in like the Hessians help them have a stronger fighting force, which is exactly what happens in the American Revolution. So of the 2,400 officers and men who were sent to Red Bank to seize Fort Mercer, the 3 highlighted battalions, or 2 battalions, 1 regiment that you see here, are the ones involved in the battle. The others are held in reserve. They never even get into the battle because it was over so quickly. And the individual that you see in this painting here is Colonel Emil von Donop, and he is the leader of the Hessian forces. So the Battle of Red Bank takes place on October 22nd, 1777. If you were a betting person, you have 500 Americans and you have roughly 1,500 attacking Hessians with close to another 1,000 held in reserve, you would probably pick the Hessians to win the day. They're the premier fighting force. They're the guys with the experience. These are career officers that, you would think that they could have taken the fort with some ease. And so what makes this battle particularly interesting is that it's not just Christopher Green and the Rhode Island Regiment defending the fort. The Pennsylvania Navy is on the Delaware River, and the Pennsylvania Navy is raining shot and ammo over Fort Mercer into the attacking Hessian forces, which make it a bloodbath. And so the battle itself, it takes place later in the day around 4 p.m. It was over in 40 minutes. It was just completely decimated, the Hessian forces. Colonel Emil von Donop goes down almost immediately within the opening, volley of shots. He gets shot in the hip. He dies a couple days later. And all the top officers experience some sort of injury or trauma, and it is just an absolute disaster for the Hessians. So it's a devastating loss. As I said, von Donop is mortally wounded. There's three of the 4 officers of the attacking battalions were killed or wounded, hence the confusion, hence the quick surrender. Hessian casualties are variously reported to be approximately 400 men, which would be about 17% of the attacking force, which is an astronomical figure for that period of time. And I'm just taking a quick moment here. My dog needs to go out, so getting my daughter to take her out. Okay, back to the program. So, in terms of the loss of life, the Battle of Red Bank, what's fascinating is reading the correspondence, reading the documentation from the Hessian side in the days following the battle. One of the individuals was writing to a commanding officer, and he says, "I am so sorry. I can't really process what happened here. I cannot get my thoughts together. We have experienced such a devastating loss that I can't even process this." And so, for example, we have Lieutenant Colonel Ludwig von Wurm. "It is painful for me to lose so many good people. I can't describe it, and I have not recovered from it." You have Lieutenant Karl Wilhelm. I won't pronounce his last name. I'll just mess it up. Anyways, a Hessian lieutenant wrote, "There was nothing to do but die or retreat." So this is the level of intensity of that battle. So when you have casualties, you have that many casualties, you have to bury people somewhere. The Whitehall house following the battle is seized. The family is forced to leave. They don't actually come back till April. So they leave in October, and their house was so devastated and their property was so devastated, they don't return until April. And so you have to have mass burial spaces. So we know from maps of the period that were produced at the time and in about the last, the 50 years following the battle, of documented spaces where individuals were buried. So for example, here's the Whitehall house. Here's where Colonel Emil von Donop was buried. He was buried individually because he was an officer. And then this is the mass grave of soldiers. And so this is the map. There's a series of maps that look very similar to this that document where these soldiers' graves were. And so from an archaeology perspective, this is what we have on our mind. We would not necessarily want to be working in spaces where we knew there were burials. And this is where we thought the main burials had taken place. So if we jump ahead to current times, to 2020, in the fall of 2020, neighbors of the park approached us about adding a 1/4 acre parcel to the northern boundary of our park. Literally, it was a lot that was just separated by a chain link fence. I don't know why it was never incorporated into the main part of the park when it became a park in the early 20th century, but it was an opportunity to bring this parcel into the park, and it looked interesting to us. When we went out to look at it, myself and our Office of Land Preservation, what we noticed was, if you can see here on the image, there's a little bit of a swell here. This is the remains of a Fort Mercer trench. And so the fort, there's a trench system that surrounded the fort, a dry moat, if you will. And this trench system it transected this lot that we were interested in looking at. And so I was really excited by that. We had never taken a look archaeologically at a trench, and so it seemed like a wonderful acquisition. And so we added it to our park boundaries. So this is looking at a historic map of Fort Mercer. This is in red, the approximate project area. This is where we were going to be working right along this trench system. So in 2021, we applied to the New Jersey Historical Commission. We received a project grant. The purpose of the grant was twofold. One was to do an archaeology survey of the newly acquired parcel. And so in terms of the history of archaeology at the park, it really wasn't until 2014 that there was a battlefield study that was done. And so you would think that the battlefield would have been studied extensively from an archaeological perspective, but it had not. And so archaeology is still relatively new at Red Bank. And so we wanted to do a study of this new lot, including ground penetrating radar. Let's see what potential could be there for something interesting, and also metal detecting. The other thing we wanted to do was public education and participation in this project. And so we had worked, we retained Wade Katz for this project, the archaeologist who I'd mentioned before. Wade and I had worked together in 2015 on that first battlefield study. And one of the things that I noticed in the park was how nuts our park visitors were for archaeology. They just were all over the archaeology team, who was wonderful. Like they had all the patience and time in the world for people. And so when we had the chance to do this project, I said, why don't we make it public? Like, why don't we have people participate and actually do archaeology and learn more about the archaeological process? And so we designed 4 public days for people to participate, and they literally worked side by side with our archaeology team. This is, I think, one of my favorite pictures from the project. This is archaeologist Dana Link, and he is offering a master class on why we do archaeology. What can we understand from archaeology? What is the archaeological method? It's not a posed picture. It was just totally candid. I was walking by and I saw him. I thought, this is a magical moment. This is a connection that our park visitors are having that they can't have if they go to, say, the Museum of the American Revolution. This is a very different experience that's very hands-on and engaged with people getting their hands dirty. So we had 100 volunteers participate in the project. And it was a wildly successful public program. So this will give you a sense of, what we were working on. Here are their test units. Their units, the archaeologists don't call them holes, but these are the units. And so what the archaeology team did was they basically did a crisscross pattern to transect the trench. And so sort of a hop and a skip and a jump, trying to sample the trench to see what's there. And these are all of our volunteers working, busy, sifting, working at screens, looking for artifacts. Everybody is supervised by a professional archaeologist who's there to answer questions and identify artifacts. So for example, we were working, if you're interested in getting involved with archaeology in New Jersey, I strongly recommend that you check out the Archaeology Society of New Jersey. They offer opportunities for its membership to participate. And this is Guy D. He's the president of the Gloucester County chapter. Wonderful and expert on Native American material. This guy can identify anything and is so fun to work with our park visitors. So in the initial phase, cutting through the top layers of the soil, you find kind of a lot of junk. You find like nails and window glass and just random trash and beer bottles, soda bottles, things like that. But as we started to progress down through the unit and get into deeper the layers of time, you find things like porcelain and ceramics. And so this isn't a colonial piece. This is more of an early 20th century piece. It's transferware, but it was exciting. Our visitors were finding things. They were engaged. They were getting dirty. They were asking questions. They're learning more about the archaeological process. We had families get involved as we were recovering more material. We had families get involved with washing the artifacts. So you can see this young family here who has come back time and again. I love this family. They're so enthusiastic, but they got to participate too, which is wonderful. And then as we started to get towards the bottom, which was about 4 feet down, we started to find military material. And so 4 feet is pretty deep. That's how much backfill was on top of this trench. And we started to find things like buttons, as you can see here, this plain face button. This over here is a knee buckle. And so we're like, yes, we are in 1777. We are approaching the Battle of Red Bank. And so we'll be finding all kinds of wonderful material culture. What was super exciting was a volunteer actually found this gold coin, a 1766 British gold guinea. It came out of the screen looking essentially pristine. It was gold. You didn't need to clean it up much. She knew right away she had found something pretty remarkable. And it stumped us. Like, you don't routinely find gold coins on like an archaeology project on a battlefield. And so after doing some research, we determined that it was worth 1 month's pay for a soldier. So it was valuable in 1777 and it is valuable today. Maybe it was a good luck charm. Maybe it was stored in a boot or in a jacket or was lost during the battle. We know that the Grenadiers, one of the Hessian regiments, were rewarded for their bravery at the Battle of Germantown, which had taken place a couple weeks before, with gold coins. And so it was a puzzle to us. We weren't sure what it was doing there. So the last day of the project was June 26th. It was wildly successful. Again, over 100 participants, a gold coin. This to us was going to be a major media story. It was a wonderful project, and we were ready to call it a day. But so Wade Katz, the archaeologist, was teasing us that the best stuff in an archaeology project are found on the last day and at the last hour. And so we were having an unrelated event in our park. We had a vintage baseball game going on. This is our county commissioner, Jim Jefferson, and archaeologist Dana Link, and they're talking about archaeology, and it was a great day, and everybody was enjoying themselves. And this over here is volunteers Joe Riley and Wayne Wilson. And Wayne came up to Wade and I around 2 o'clock in the afternoon and said, "I think I found a bone." And I still can't even like really process what that moment was like, because it was just, I guess the word I would use is stunning. Like, a bone? What do you mean you found a bone? There's no burials here. So we went over to take a look at it, and lo and behold, it looked like a bone. It looked like a femur, a leg bone. So we cleared everybody out of the park. We asked everybody to leave and to please keep this, on the down low till we could figure out what was going on. And it raised this question of like, what do you do when you find human remains on a battlefield that is owned by a county in the state of New Jersey? There's no handbook for this. There's no guidance for this. So we started with the county coroner's office, the medical examiner, and they said, you need to call the police to determine if it's a crime scene. So we called the West Deptford Police Department, who came over, and they determined that it was not, in fact, a modern crime scene, and that we could just proceed. And so then we called the New Jersey State Police Forensic Anthropology Unit, and in the next week, Anna Delaney, who's seen here in blue, and this is Wade here in pink, Anna came out to determine if it was an animal bone or a human bone. That was the main question that we had. And she determined it to be a human femur. And in the course of examining the bottom of the unit, she could see her, she's using her brush there. She said, you have a whole lot more here. And so we began the process. The county, Gloucester County, agreed to work with the New Jersey State Police Forensic Anthropology Unit to remove the exposed remains. So that was June 26th. So the New Jersey State Police have been tremendous friends to this project. And so it's been remarkable working with them and their resources that they have brought to us. So for example, this is Anna. She is here. I call this the CSI team because I'm not exactly sure everything that they're doing. But they were testing a number of the artifacts to see if they would have evidence of blood residue. So this knee buckle that we pulled early in the project was positive for blood residue, or at least in the field, it was positive for blood residue. Blood residue holds the potential for DNA. And so that was extremely exciting to us. So what started off as sort of a hop and a skip and a jump across the trench actually ended up being a 10 by 30 trench space that we excavated. And so every place there was a wall, there were human remains coming out, projecting out of the wall space. And so the archaeology team took down each wall layer by layer to expose the remains and then to remove them from the bottom of the trench. So in terms of what the heck do we have on our hands here, right? So I'm not an archaeologist. They sometimes let me work a screen, which is super fun, and I geek out when they let me do that. But I'm a historian. And so when everybody is doing archaeology, I'm going back over the historical record to try and get an understanding of what the heck is happening in this space. Why is there a burial here? Well, we know that the Mirbach regiment, seen here in the middle, this is the space that they were attacking during the battle. And we know that the Mirbach regiment experienced very heavy losses. In fact, there's not even exact documentation of who they lost. There isn't even a list. They lost so many people. The Mirbach regiment never fights again in another Revolutionary War battle because the unit was so decimated after Red Bank. In the process of recovering the human remains, we found all kinds of musket balls and military material. So we found 19 impacted musket balls, which you can see here. These are musket balls. People frequently remark, oh, it's like a marble, it's so small. These can do a heck of a lot of damage. Colonel Emil von Donop, who I mentioned earlier, who was the leader of the Hessians, he took a musket ball to his hip and he died 3 days later. And so these are extremely powerful 18th century bullets. What we know about these musket balls is that they are American, and we know that based on their size. And so we were finding American musket balls in association with human remains, which led us to believe that we were dealing with the remains of Hessian soldiers who died during the battle and were buried the next day at the bottom of the trench. In terms of the reported injuries, what we were finding at the bottom of the trench was consistent with the documentation of the battle. So, for example, the types of wounds, and these are Hessian words. Right leg shot apart, both legs shot to pieces, shot through both legs, shot through the chest and right arm, through the leg, in the left knee, in the arm, right arm shot off, through the left leg, through the neck, left foot smashed, right leg shot, right knee smashed. And so those little musket balls that we were looking at have incredible capacity to do a lot of damage. The piece of artillery, if you will, that was sort of shocking to us, I guess, because of the way it was used. I had mentioned that the Pennsylvania Navy was on the river firing over Fort Mercer into the attacking Hessian forces. And what they were firing are these two pieces here. This thing that looks like a dumbbell is called bar shot. And this thing over here with the chain is called chain shot. And so bar shot and chain shot are used in naval engagements to take out a ship's rigging. It's fired by a cannon, just like a cannonball. It comes out of the cannon, whips through the air, and it can crack a mast and take down the sail. It can just leave a ship completely immobilized. But what was particularly horrific about this battle is that the Pennsylvania Navy was using this material to attack Hessian forces. And in the words of one Hessian officer, two ships on the Delaware River, fired chain shot into the flank. The latter knocked down whole rows of men. And that is consistent with the injuries that we were seeing to these individuals. And so just as a heads up, the next couple of slides are going to feature images of human remains. And so here is Anna working on a set of leg bones. This is Dr. Stuart Alexander. He's a forensic dentist. And this is our young intern who was helping us with the project. And so Joanna Maurer. So what's interesting about the remains and what stumped us initially was that when we found the leg bones, we were waiting to find the rest of that person. But there was no rest of that person. There were just leg bones. There were just crania. We didn't have complete individuals. So I think one of the things to understand about this recovery project is that this was not a formal burial. There's no casket. There's no coffin. Individuals were simply tossed. Pieces of individuals were tossed to the bottom of the trench following the battle. And so everywhere you see a yellow cross is where we recovered a crania, a head. And so this is an extremely small space. It's very dense. If you can imagine archaeology twister, if you will, of trying to work around a team of archaeologists who were trying to expose the remains and lift them, it was very tight quarters and extremely dense. There's a lot of material. So we know that we have the remains of at least 15 individuals, and that's based on dentition. So in some instances, all we have is somebody's jawbone. We don't even have a complete skull or crania. So in terms of the conditions of the remains, one individual had a musket ball lodged in his lower back, a lead canister shot in the middle of his back where his vertebrae should have been, an iron grape shot in his left arm that he was lying on. And that's this individual here. This person is the most complete person that we recovered. You can see they are face down. You can see it does have some vertebrae. It has some scapula, some shoulder bone here. What was remarkable about this individual is when when they lifted the remains out of the bottom of the unit, they kept it packed in dirt to keep it stable. And in the lab is where they cleaned it all out. And what they discovered is when they flipped this individual over, there's actually a complete facial structure. And I'm going to come back to that. So another individual had been hit twice in his knee with a musket ball, hence the blood-soaked knee buckle that we recovered, once in the midsection by a musket ball and once by a musket ball in the arm. And here gives you a sense that these are the musket balls that are found in association with the human remains. So this long piece here is a human femur, and here is the musket ball. And then over here, this is hip bone, and then here is musket ball. So as I mentioned, Stuart Alexander is a forensic dentist. He is the individual who's called in when they need to make a dental identification on somebody. And so that's Stuart's job in addition to being a practicing dentist. He brought his x-ray gun and actually x-rayed all of the teeth in situ in the unit. If we were to lose any of the teeth, at least we would still have the x-rays of it. And one of the things that you can see about the x-rays is that an intact root structure. And that's really important for the acquisition of DNA material. And so when we talk at the end about DNA, this is what we're talking about using, these teeth. So what do we know so far? We know, as I mentioned, that we have at least 15 individuals. They're all male, young to early middle-aged adults. One of the preliminary observations in the field was that one of them was as young as 18 years old, which is sobering as a parent of a 17-year-old and 19-year-old, as well as a university professor. This was a child, essentially, who got caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Based on their teeth, they are of European descent. The bone preservation is fair to poor. It's not great. It could be better in terms of doing a forensic analysis. And we're hoping that with the teeth that we're going to get a number of good DNA samples. So the next steps that we're working on, we're in the process of wrapping up the initial forensic analysis. And so we're doing x-rays, CAT scans. Our first round of DNA analysis has gone out and we are waiting for that. We should have that in the next 2 weeks. That round of DNA is going to determine what other tests we can run. So do we have any good usable DNA is the question that we're waiting to hear about. Stable isotope analysis is another test that we can run, and that can tell us region, ethnicity, and diet of the individual. We're going to continue working on the blood residue analysis and continue to try and identify who these individuals were. And so this is the forensic anthropology bioarchaeology team. And so we have Dr. Tom Christ. So Tom is a bioarchaeologist at Utica University. He is amazingly knowledgeable in this area. And so this is Tom here. This is Stuart Alexander. This is an intern who's working with the state police. And then this is Anna Delaney. And they are working to finalize their findings of the forensic anthropology report. So in terms of what we have been doing, so August 2nd, 2022 is when the public announcement went out about the discovery. And since then, we've been continuing to not only work on the DNA analysis, but also to invest in our public archaeology program. So now we have a public archaeology program. This past summer, we received funding from the New Jersey Historical Commission. Last summer, or 2 summers ago, we had 100 volunteers. This time, we had 200 volunteers. So we're growing the program, and it makes my public historian heart so happy to have so many people enjoying archaeology in the park. The grant also supported extensive ground penetrating radar. If you're curious about that, I can answer questions about it. But essentially, what we're trying to determine is, are there more burials at Red Bank? And so the answer, the short answer is yes, because we know when we removed the 15 individuals, that there were more people there that we simply did not have the time or the resources to get to. So we know that there's more individuals there, but from an archaeology perspective and a preservation perspective, we wanted to know if there were any more sensitive areas in the park, and we are waiting for that final report. This is near and dear to my heart. So, of course, after all of the hullabaloo about this discovery, I thought hard about how to get my students involved at Red Bank. And I really wanted them to be in the park doing archaeology and public history with our park visitors. So Wade and I created a class. We piloted it last summer, full overflowing enrollment, 17 students, which is wonderful. And it's called Battle Lab Archaeology and Public History at Red Bank Battlefield Park. So these are our students, and pardon me while I smile because I love these students so much. They had such a blast. We all had a great time. It was amazing watching them grow, knowing really nothing about archaeology and public history to being pretty good, experts with our public and talking to them about what they were finding. And so we'll be back this summer. So I'm really looking forward to that. We have all kinds of grants that we're working on. We received funding from the Society of the Cincinnati to do an initial round of conservation of the artifacts that we recovered. And so because they were in the ground so long and exposed to moisture, a lot of the artifacts are unstable and really can't be displayed safely. And so I actually just dropped off the material today to the person doing conservation, and we will have those items on display in the Whitehall House in our 2024 season, which I'm very excited about. Soon, we will have, courtesy of the New Jersey State Police, a facial reconstruction of one of the individuals who we recovered. That was the individual who was face down that I had told you about. And so we will actually have a rendering of what one of these people looked like, which is stunning, that the potential that this holds for really connecting a person to these remains, right? It becomes way more personal when you're looking at an individual's face as opposed to a bone structure. And so just getting towards the end here, as a park director and as a public historian, the project has created new opportunities for us to share a different story on the battlefield. I can't tell you how many tours I've given of that battlefield, and the number 400 dead or injured has just rolled off my lips. I didn't, I'm not saying that it was presented insensitively, but it was just a number. And after working on this project, it's not just a number anymore. It's really something to look at these individuals and to think about what their day was like on October 22nd, 1777. And so this is a quote from Captain Johann Ewald of the Hessian Field Jaeger Corps, who wrote in his memoirs, "The day was especially sad for me. I lost 5 of my oldest friends and 4 of my best friends were severely wounded. As long as I have served, I have not left the battlefield in such deep sorrow." So for us, it's a different opportunity to speak to our park visitors about who were the Hessians, why were they there, what role did they play in the revolution, and how can we talk about that inclusive narrative that I talked about in the beginning of the presentation? Like, how can we talk about all the different people who participated in the American Revolution at Fort Mercer, and what does that tell us about the history of the Revolution, specifically for us, about the absolute horror and violence of an American Revolutionary War battlefield. This story has resonated with people around the world. And I think that to me is one of the remarkable things. It's not just the wonderful state of New Jersey who are fans of this project, which I greatly appreciate, but this is going out across Europe, Asia. We received emails from so many different people who were curious about the project and just wanted some more information, or to say, thank you, which is so remarkable when somebody says thank you for the work that you're doing, because it's hard. It's hard work. It's emotional work. It's draining work, but ultimately incredibly rewarding. We did receive a grant from the New Jersey Humanities Council to further do research on these Hessian individuals. And so the ultimate idea of this project is to potentially identify, if we could identify one, that would be amazing. If we could, put a name to those remains, that would be fantastic. What would be even greater is if we could connect these individuals to a modern descendant community in Germany. And so this past summer, we actually had a visit from Iliane Meschemik and her family from Germany. They are descendants of Hessian soldiers, and they wanted to come and visit the sites in America where their ancestors had fought. And so she came with her lovely family of 5. Her children came with her, and they placed this flag from Hesse and a remembrance stone saying "Rest in peace" on the site of where we recovered the remains. So that, to me, as a public historian, is a remarkable moment, a remarkable connection. And so just to conclude, the work that our project is doing, in September, shortly after our announcement went live, I was reading the New York Times, and it was about the work of recovering mass graves in the Ukraine. But the headline caught my attention for obvious reasons: the singular offense of the mass grave. And so Roger Cohen wrote, "Every culture wants to memorialize its dead. Every family needs the missing to be identified to reach closure. Perhaps that is why a wartime mass grave offends something so deep in the human conscience. Any mass grave demands of our humanity the reconstitution of the individual's lives ended there." And that's the work that we're doing. So I am more than happy to answer any questions that you might have, anything you're curious about, fire away.
Thank you so much, Jen. I have a question already to start us off. I'm going to jump right in. Do you have plans to do more digs on site based on that radar you did this past summer?
Yeah, so the thing about the ground penetrating radar that's so helpful is it's telling us where we should not be digging, right? So like a ground penetrating radar study is just going to tell you where there's something of they call it like an anomaly, right? There's something unusual happening there. Sometimes if it's like an actual grave shaft, you can see that in the GPR, but that's not the case at Red Bank. And so what we're hoping is that that GPR data will give us a map of areas that are sensitive and that we should steer clear of. We do not want to be disturbing any other burials. And so there are more digs planned. This is an ongoing public archaeology program, so we will be back in the summer. And if you would like to be on our contact list to participate, people travel from all around. So traveling from North Jersey is no big deal to come to Red Bank for this. Just send me an email, or you can reach out to Angelica, or you can reach me through Rowan University. I'll put you on our contact list, but we will certainly be back next summer.
So interesting. Thank you. Anyone else, feel free to unmute, or if you'd rather I read a question for you, feel free to use the chat. I do have a follow-up if I can. I find this fascinating. So when you say there's sensitive areas that potentially have more burials, so is that goal to not disturb, is it, and that's knowing though that there could be work done, that what's respectful is to leave those burials as are?
Yeah, that is the general practice. That's the general archaeological practice. If you are aware of a burial, that it should be left alone unless there's a compelling reason. For example, if it's a shallow grave, if it's in danger of being exposed. So there's a project that just happened in Camden, South Carolina, where there were the remains of Revolutionary War soldiers who were recovered, and like literally bones were projecting out of the dirt, right? So that's a bad situation. And so they were actually reinterred, they were removed. And so our situation, they're about 4 feet deep. And so that to us is safe. One of the things that we're exploring right now is how do we memorialize the site? How do we mark the site? And also discussions about reinterment where we found them. And so as you can imagine, there's a lot of bureaucracy involved in these conversations. So you can't just bury somebody, right? Like you have to there's a number of hoops that you have to jump through. And so we're ongoing conversations about what that space should look like. But the thing that I think is most remarkable about our park visitors is that people, first of all, they want to go visit the site. And so we will walk them out so they can see it. And just their disposition when they're there, like they recognize that it's a special place, it's a sacred space, something tragic happened there. And so how do you then manifest that in some sort of interpretive way, right? Signage, memorialization, things like that.
There's so many layers to how you do handle such a situation. So thank you for all your work on it. Really looking forward to what you learn more from the DNA. Like you said, so exciting. Can you identify a person or a descendant is just amazing if that can come out of this. So
Wade constantly jokes that somewhere in Germany, there's a family that's going to get closure that they didn't know they need closure, right? Yeah.
It's true. People doing their family research, it's absolutely true. So that's truly remarkable work. So I can't wait to hear what you all uncover. But I'll stop talking. If other people have questions, feel free to chime in.
Jen, I have a question. You had said that you can get the DNA from, I guess, within the teeth or the gum, the jawbone or something. And, I imagine that could help, uh, identify the heirs or the descendants of some of the people you test. Any chance of getting archaeologists from Germany to come to the facility, come to the park?
So that's such a good question. We get that question a lot. So what is the relationship like with Germany? What was their reaction? Is there any relationship? After we discovered the Hessians and we were moving forward with plans to announce the discovery, our county council in Gloucester County reached out to the German embassy to alert them that this discovery had been made and invited them to come to the site just so that they could be assured that everything was treated with sensitivity and care and respect. They declined the offer. They said thank you. It wasn't anything, it was very polite, and they didn't come to the press announcement. But following the press announcement, all kinds of folks from Germany were emailing us, including people who said they were descendants of Hessian soldiers and were ready to commit DNA to the project. And so we hadn't even gotten to a conversation about DNA yet. And they were like, they're very interested in it. We've also made contact with the German War Graves Repatriation Commission, and they focus primarily on modern wars. So they don't go as far back as the 18th century. It's more like 20th century and 19th century Napoleonic wars. And we have a good working relationship. We've had a number of good conversations with them. What was interesting about the project is that it started off as, let's try to identify these guys, and it still is that. But then in the course of the past year, really talking as a team about how did this battle impact these communities in Germany? For example, we know one community with 18 people in a village, 4 families had 4 sons who came over to Red Bank. And that's remarkable to think about the memory of that experience in these German communities. And so we have a historian, Bob Seelig, who's an excellent military historian who just spent a week in Germany going through the archives and found some stuff, some frustrating stuff, but also some leads. So it's definitely a project that moves kind of slowly. But there, to get back to your original question, there was an archaeology office in Germany that had expressed interest just in talking about like what kind of material were you finding? Is there anything we can help you identify? So the project is the thing to me as a public historian that makes this so exciting is just how big it's gotten and how many different people are volunteering information and want to contribute something and want to make it this meaningful impact on the project, which is wonderful.
German newspapers, the large ones, have correspondence in the United States. It might be advantageous to reach out to 1 or 2 or 3 of the largest German news publications and see if they could, send a reporter over to, the grave site.
That would be remarkable. I mean, and then of course, hopefully it reaches even more people. I mean,
It would, yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe an
the thing about the
articles.
DNA that gets like a little tricky is if you have to be registered, right? And so you have to have some sort of, database to work off of material that you can connect people to. And so right now that's so far away from where we're at, but eventually that's going to be, where what will have to happen if we're going to make this connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool idea, Mark. Thank you.
I have a question, Angela.
Go ahead.
If there were American soldiers that were killed there, if there were, what was the process for them? Were their bodies taken in local cemeteries, or where did they go?
That's an excellent question. So 14 Americans died at the Battle of Red Bank.
Mm-hmm.
There's no documentary evidence of where those individuals were buried. In all likelihood, they were buried in the fort. The day after the battle, October 23rd, Colonel Christopher Green orders his men to bury the dead. And so it's just the dead. There's 2 soldiers, I think, who document that it took them all day. There were so many dead to bury them. So in all likelihood, the Americans were buried within the fort and probably had a proper burial, as in laid out east-west, probably not a coffin. There was concern that the Hessians were going to come again, or the British were going to breach the river, and they were going to attack. So everything would have been rushed. We do have a documentary source from 1905 from the Philadelphia Inquirer that says when they were installing a black wrought iron fence around one of the monuments in the park, that they discovered patriot bones. And all it's like literally 4 sentences, and the patriot bones were removed. Doesn't say where. There is a local cemetery that does have the remains of some Hessian soldiers who died after the Battle of Red Bank. It was a pauper cemetery, and so it's entirely possible that those remains went there. But one of the reasons why we're doing the extensive ground penetrating radar is to determine if we have the potential for an American burial at Red Bank, because if there is, then obviously we want that to be documented just as much as we're documenting the Hessian experience. And I think the thing for us that's made clear from this project is that battlefield is a cemetery. It's not like an official cemetery, but there are so many burials on that site that is really how it needs to be treated in terms of park management plans, landscaping plans. When we have old trees come down, we need to have a new policy about how we're dealing with that, how our trench system is preserved. And so there's a lot of things that I'm thinking about as a park director to make sure that the integrity of the battlefield is preserved and safe.
Because I think unmarked graves are always so sad. When
I agree.
A family that knew that their American soldier had died there, and yet they had no way to memorialize them.
I agree. When I walk past that area where the black fence is today, I always do think about that, and that is an area that we're looking into to see if there is a potential for an American burial there. Just to think that was at least, at the very least, it was at some point a burial site for Americans, and it's not marked today. As soon as we have the information, then we can mark it. But no, it is sad to think about that. It's sad to think that there were families who never found out what happened to their loved ones.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Elaine. Any other questions, thoughts?
We'll say if you're curious and you want to learn more, if you go to Rowan University's website and you just type in the search box, Red Bank Battlefield, Rowan put together a beautiful website that has images from the project. There's a video that's an interview with me and with Wade Katz, our archaeologist. And so you can learn a little bit more and see some of the amazing images from the project. And also, if you just Google the project, it's in the New York Times, it's in Smithsonian Magazine. There's been really, really nice press coverage that has some just really well done. And of course, if you have any questions for me, please don't hesitate. I literally get a few questions a week from random people just emailing me, and I'm always happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Jen. This was fascinating. It's really exciting for us to hear the progress you're making. And I know I can't wait to hear the next part in the series when you begin that DNA work. So truly, thank you so much for your time tonight. And I think we're getting you 2 minutes to the dot to your Phillies game. So you will be on time. Thank you again, Jen, so much. Everyone have a great night.
My pleasure. Take care, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.